Mr. President, thank you. I come to the floor today to honor one of our former colleagues and a dear friend. U.S. Senator Malcolm Wallop died yesterday, September 14th, 2011, at his Wyoming home overlooking the majestic Bighorn Mountains. Senator Wallop will be remembered as a unique and enduring figure in the history of Wyoming and in the history of the United States. Malcolm was a stalwart defender of freedom and democracy around the world, and a determined advocate for limited government and opportunity for every person. Like that iconic range in northern Wyoming that he loved, Malcolm stood very tall. As a citizen, as a state and federal legislator, and as a loyal guardian for Wyoming people and our way of life. I want to send my deepest condolences to Malcolm's family back in Wyoming and around the country, to Isabel, his wife, to his beloved children, Malcolm, Matthew, Amy, and Paul, to his dear sisters, Janine and Carolyn. I also want to offer my condolences to all of those folks who worked for Senator Wallop during his years of extraordinary public service. I have met most and have known many over the years. My wife, Bobby, served on his very first staff in Washington. And last night she shared with me again what we've all come to know. Malcolm was a kind, a caring, and an extraordinary gentleman. Malcolm's staff served him ably and honorably. I know there are also some in this body today who served alongside Malcolm Wallop. You no doubt remember him well. It was just 4 years ago that Senator Wallop returned here to this chamber and attended my own swearing-in on June 25th, 2007. On that day, as is tradition, Senator Wallop walked with me up to the President's desk to take the oath. He stood with me during the ceremony and offered private words of encouragement and advice. I was honored that day to have him there next to me, and it saddens me greatly to join Senator Enzi to announce his death. Malcolm Wallop was someone I followed throughout his career. I admired him greatly. He was a man that many of us looked up to as he grew into one of the most influential legislators of his time. "Hello, my friend." That was his classic Western rancher's drawl, and it was what you heard if Malcolm Wallop was on the other end of the phone line or came through the door. Malcolm was a real-life version of anyone's image of a Western gentleman. Today, I remember him as a brilliant servant leader. He possessed a special Western wisdom which often found those around him racing just to catch up. He found great content in all of the many facets of his life. Even during recent years when numerous medical challenges conquered his physical body, his spirit and his intellect were never diminished. Public service was his heritage and his calling. His grandfather, Oliver Henry Noel Wallop, founded the Canyon Ranch and Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming in 1888. That's before Wyoming even became a state. Noel had the distinction of serving first in the Wyoming State Legislature and then later in life in the House of Lords in Great Britain. Noel was the youngest son of Lord Isaac Newton Wallop, the 5th Earl of Portsmouth. When Noel's older brothers died, he reluctantly returned to England to fulfill the family duty. However, his own son, Oliver, who was Malcolm's father, he had been growing up and he remained in Wyoming. Malcolm was born in 1933, and Bighorn was always his home. His children and his grandchildren are 4th and 5th generations of his family to make their lives in the beautiful Bighorn Mountain area of north central Wyoming. They ranch, they own businesses, they teach, they raise their children, they serve their community, all those things that we do to make this nation strong. Malcolm was a pilot. He served as a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army. He was a cattle rancher, elected to the Wyoming State Legislature, serving both in the House as well as in the Senate from 1969 through 1976. In 1974, Wallop ran unsuccessfully for governor of Wyoming. But it was during that summer campaign that Malcolm began to distinguish himself as a principled and energetic future force in Republican politics. He didn't shy away from the tough issues. Instead, he seemed to gather strength from the challenges. Only 2 years later, he unseated incumbent U.S. Senator Gail McGee and became Wyoming's 19th senator, serving from 1977 to 1995. When Malcolm was elected to this body in 1976, it was really something. You heard about the commercials from Senator Enzi. Well, a group of young people had gathered around to support his very unlikely bid to serve Wyoming in the United States Senate. The national press called it the Children's Crusade. Many of those young people came to Washington with him, and my wife, Bobby Brown, was among those who began her own public service career as part of his first-term staff. It is an indication of the affection and the loyalty felt by those who were part of his team that more than 60 people gathered together with Malcolm in Wyoming in 2006 for a 30-year reunion. He served 3 terms in the Senate, and his work here was very broad in scope. His presence was lasting, and it touched on the mercurial issues of the late 70s and 80s, from energy policy to the environment, from national security to tax reform. One of our own colleagues, Senator Carl Levin, said of Malcolm, quote, he said, "While we disagreed again, probably as often as we agreed, that didn't stand in the way of my admiration for the quality, the characteristic that he had of letting you know precisely where he stood and why." And he went on to say, and his patriotism is second to none in this body. Malcolm Wallop was the first elected official to propose a space-based missile system, which eventually became part of our Strategic Defense Initiative. He was highly regarded for his knowledge and understanding of defense issues, and surely helped bring the Berlin Wall down. Later in his Senate service, he was a member of the Helsinki Commission, and he traveled in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union as an arms control negotiator. Speaking of their strategic partnership, President Reagan said, and I quote, "Leadership, hard work, experience, loyalty to Wyoming. That's what Malcolm Wallop is all about." Malcolm was fiercely protective of states' rights, property rights, the rights to privacy, and he was a champion of the rights of the individual. He is remembered for the Wallop Amendment to the Surface Mining Control Act, a property rights issue which forced the federal government to compensate property owners whose ability to mine was undercut by regulation. He worked successfully to protect states' interest in the Clean Water Act. He brought significant wilderness to Wyoming through the 1984 Wilderness Act. He was a key force behind the passage of the far-reaching 1992 Energy Policy Act. Senator Wallop, on more than one occasion, commented that he, quote, was not burdened with a law degree. And yet he was selected in his very first term to serve on the Judiciary Committee, the first non-lawyer ever so chosen. Perhaps his greatest contribution was his landmark legislation to address the heartbreaking issue of parental kidnapping. He was one of a long and distinguished line of Wyoming senators who served with distinction on the Senate Finance Committee. His 1981 bill to cut inheritance and gift taxes is remembered as one of the most substantive changes to tax policy that decade. He appreciated opportunities which allowed for private-public sector partnerships. Early in his Senate career, there was talk of establishing a national service requirement for young people. But Malcolm felt that if we were going to require young people to serve the nation should recognize them for the service so many were already providing through their daily lives. This resulted in his leadership to establish the Congressional Award. He joined with colleagues in both houses of Congress in a bipartisan effort, and a unique program available to all interested young people in the country was created. It's a program of Congress which operates with private sector funds. It's an earned honor and is the highest honor which we bestow on our nation's young people. The many young people in my state who participate in the Close-Up program do so because Malcolm thought it was an important opportunity for his young constituents. At the time, Close-Up only offered their program in the cities. Well, Malcolm worked to convince the Close-Up Foundation that a statewide program would work, and I believe that Close-Up today counts their Wyoming program as one of its most successful. Malcolm Wallop reached across Capitol Hill. He reached across party lines in the creation of the Aquatic Resources Trust Fund, commonly known as the Wallop Bro Trust Fund, which has resulted in billions of dollars generated by users for support of fisheries and wetlands around the country. But it wasn't all serious. He was an enthusiastic supporter of his staff's efforts to deal with their homesickness in July. And in July of 1977, they held the first Frontier East, an East Coast celebration of Cheyenne's Frontier Days, which is known simply as Cow Pie. Cow Pie stands for the Committee of Wyoming People in the East. It is still today one of Washington area's most celebrated summer events. My wife Bobby reminds me how absolutely joyful Malcolm was each year on his birthday. And his birthday was February 27th. As Bobby reminds me, that's when his staff organized the Wally Awards, making great fun of themselves and their boss. I'm told the best was the impersonation of him by his chief of staff, Bill Hill. That's the same chief of staff who then went on to serve as Chief Justice of the Wyoming Supreme Court. Malcolm remained forever steadfast against the growth and the power of centralized government. And he warned, as we remain the sheep, the government happily remains our shepherd. He talked often as a senator of our shrinking freedom and the battle to lay claim to our fragile liberty. That was Malcolm Wallop. When he announced his retirement in 1993 after 18 years in the United States Senate, Senator Wallop told the Casper Star-Tribune simply, "I don't think the only place to fight for freedom is in the halls of Congress." His life after the Senate was filled with his continuing work on issues focusing on constitutionally limited government, a strong national defense, and the rights of the individual. To address these issues, he founded the Frontiers of Freedom. He spoke with power and eloquence about the issues which he found to be the core of our great country. In a 2003 interview with Peter Evans, he said, quote, "You'll find in the American people an enormous sense of pride and self-assurance that only comes from people living free. It's unbelievably invigorating and very reassuring to know the great experiment," he said, "is in the hands of people who don't even know it and isn't in the hands of the people who think they hold it." Malcolm Wallop was so many things, but what Malcolm Wallop was not was sentimental. The new phase of his life was the full phase of his life. He did not dwell on past things. His energy was always spent looking forward. I want to conclude today by repeating Senator Wallop's own words. Speaking in 2005 before the Ronald Reagan Gala sponsored by the Frontiers of Freedom, Senator Wallop spoke about his own beliefs, and I quote, "Government was not meant to possess us, rule us, encompass us, judge for us, substitute for us. It was meant to serve us. We were founded as a noble, self-governing tribe of free people, respecting each other as Americans under God, not under Washington. Americans know this even if their government does not. The biggest difference between the principle of government in America and anywhere else is that here the rulers must stick to clearly defined tasks, while ordinary people may do whatever they wish." He goes on to say, "We must make up our minds to put this principle into practice again, lest we lose the spirit that made us the envy of the world. Most important," he said, "the American model is based on a certain kind of people, defined not by race but by virtue and by the willingness to take responsibility for our own lives. People fit to be Americans ask for blessings only from God, because being Americans is not a matter of birth. We must practice it every day, lest we become something else. He says, the size of our continent, its fabulous wealth, its indescribable beauty, the ships, tanks, and airplanes in our arsenal are no treasure compared to the moral character of the American people. I pray to God, he said, that he will graciously help us preserve and protect that splendid moral base. And that ends his quote. To Isabel and his beloved children, Malcolm, Matthew, Amy, and Paul, to his dear sisters, Janine and Carolyn, we thank you for letting him share so much of his life with us all. There is no question our world is better for the time he spent addressing the great issues of the day, and we are grateful. We can cherish our memories and stories of Malcolm, knowing that he would cast a wry glance and wonder why we weren't spending our thoughts and our energy on a challenge that needed our attention. It's what he would expect of all of us. It's the example that he left for us. It is his legacy. And so today, Godspeed, Malcolm. Mr. President, the U.S. Senate, Wyoming, the United States of America, has lost one of its most steadfast defenders.